Ary Rosenbaum with another fun-filled episode of that 401k podcast. This week's topic, we're going to talk about dead 401k plans tell no tales, which is a story of terminated 401k plans and the issues that may result from them because someone didn't do their job. But of course, first things first, go to that 401ksite.com. End of January, we got a National Virtual Conference, free to attend. Which is fantastic. Got a lot of providers coming up, and should be exciting. I got to invite a couple other providers to speak. I got to work on it today. It's been something that I've been pushing off quite a bit. I'm not a big been inundated with a lot of stuff. Just December is just that month where, you got 50 million things going off at once, end of the year stuff, new prospecting for my fiduciary business, daughter coming back from the semester and going to Florida at the end of the month, and 50 million other, signings that I go to with my son and all that kind of stuff. But of course, we also have live events that cost a couple of bucks, $100 to attend, $50, multiple attendees from the same firm. That would be Chicago in April, Denver in May. I have to book Washington, D.C. for September. We talked about that last week. Go to that 401ksite.com, sign up. Plan provider, you want to sponsor one of these events, starting is $500, same price we've been charging since we started this in 2018. So hope you consider that, and if you sponsor one of the live events, we'll throw in a virtual sponsorship for free. So let's get to the topic at hand. Pirates of the Caribbean, or Caribbean. Jack Sparrow said, "Dead men tell no tales." Now, I've never seen any of the movies. I think, what have there been, 4 or 5 of them? I like the ride at Disney, even though they changed it, because a lot of the stuff was politically incorrect. I get that. They added some stuff from the movies. Still a great ride. I can't stand the people, like the Disney people that, act. I've been going to the park since 1977. I haven't been to Disney World since 2020, since that ill-fated national conference the week of COVID. We went to Disneyland last June. Can't stand those people who, I went there when I was first 5. I'm glad that the park isn't the same as it was in 1977. Things have to change. So I know that people are complaining about the boat ride, whatever, the Mississippi boat ride, and the Frontier Land, this Tom Sawyer thing, or whatever it was that I haven't been to since 1977, even though I've been to the park about 8 or 9 times since then. But, that's just the nature of people, because it was something. They're not reminiscing because it was something so fantastic. They're just reminiscing something from their youth and hate the idea that something from their youth has been taken away. There was a restaurant in Bergen County in Paramus called The Fireplace, and my wife had told me about it, and her father had taken her to her, and we used to love going. And then after COVID, during COVID, businesses like that were very, very much hurt. And then after COVID, they closed, they sold. The real estate was a valuable piece of stretch on Route 17 in Paramus. I think now it's a Taco Bell or Chick-fil-A, or I think it's a Chick-fil-A. And we won an auction. My wife thought I was crazy. I won an auction for a sign from the store. I wanted something. My buddy Ted, who's a sports card shop owner, bought one of the trains from there. I went to pick it up, and, was like, oh, my family's going to miss it. And the owner of the place said, there's a time and place for everything. And the time for this place has ended. And that's the nature of life. Life goes on. Some things don't go on forever. My favorite restaurant in the entire world was a restaurant called Caravel. It literally was a diner. That's essentially what it was. And it was on Avenue M in Brooklyn. We used to call it the East Midwood Annex. So people from East Midwood Jewish Center would go there. It was not a kosher place. And, the neighborhood was becoming religious. And you knew that the time for that place was going to end. It's just the demographics were not going to support the restaurant. And it went under. They sold the owners wisely sold it off to somebody else, who, of course, you know, had to close it. That's life. But I'm digressing. A dead 401k plan can come back to haunt a plan sponsor with interest penalties in the Department of Labor. It's one of those things where if you don't do it correctly, it's just gonna, you know, gnaw at you, and it could be an issue. And I'll say that as an ERISA attorney. A 401k plan, doesn't die quietly. It's a living legal entity with obligations that survive the business itself. And like any pirate curse, those obligations don't vanish just because the captain jumped ship. The ghost fleet of forgotten plans. I've seen a lot of ghost plans, and, what happens? It's a company closed down, the plan still exists, or no one filed the final 5500. Maybe nobody distributed all the assets or formally adopted a termination resolution. It becomes an issue. And, there are times where, like I said, at final 5500 is the last thing they haven't done. That's how ghosts, get you. The IRS and DOL don't like unfinished business. A plan without a final 5500 is like a ship without a port. It keeps drifting. Eventually, the IRS and DOL pick it up. It could be, at any instance when they pick up this information, and you get that letter. Our records indicate that your plan has not filed the Form 5500 for the following years. And, problem, what happens if the company no longer exists? And the caveat of that final 5500, it's not 7 months after the end of the plan year. It's 7 months from the date of the distribution of the last assets. So there are a lot of people who are terminating a plan, doing the final 5500, and not realizing that they've been late. That is that's a really big issue. And that's that black pearl of compliance, that Form 5500. The final 5500, like I said, isn't due July 31st. It's due 7 months after all plan assets are distributed. And again, that is a big issue that I see a lot of plan providers and a lot of plan sponsors screwing up royally. So let's go to what I think is the proper method of terminating a plan. Do a board or owner resolution. You adopt a formal resolution, specifying the effective date. You fully vest all participants. You stop the perils and contributions. You distribute all assets. You file the final Form 5500, and you maintain plan records, at least 6 years. I do want to caveat and say that you should provide a notice. And a pension plan, a DB plan, money purchase, anything that requires minimum funding, you're required to give a 204H notice. And it was always told to me, it's optional to notify plan participants. And I've never had a plan where I did optionally not notify plan participants, because it's considered good form to let people know that their 401k plan is terminating. That's how I see it, but it's not legally required. But I think the Department of Labor would have issues with you if you still didn't do that. So provide notice. It's always important. And of course, one of the biggest problems with a terminated plan is the curse of the missing participant. You have that, you're terminating the plan, and you got to distribute all assets, and there's that one person you can't find. That was a bigger problem back in the day before the internet, or before, the proliferation of all these search engines and search, tools and all that kind of stuff. I mean, when I started in this business in 1998, the, retirement plan internet thing was just really in its infancy. I've told the story that, I don't think we had a 401k website until like 2000, and you couldn't change your deferrals on it, or your allocation. It just gave you it was using that old Relia software that was pushing the participant site, and just would tell you your balances by source. So back in the old days, what we would do is, we can't find these terminated participants. We're just going to send 100% withholding to the government. And, the Department of Labor, a long time ago already, cracked down on that. You had the option of missing participant search engine, finding one of these tools. And these online tools are fantastic about researching people. I used that one time on a local political race and saw that one of the candidates filed for bankruptcy. That picked that up. Uh, so, these search things, they're $30 a month, whatever it is, they're cheap. But we got our friends at Penchecks and other IRA providers that'll do that for you. They'll park the money in a stable value fund, and they will try to locate these missing plan participants. And they do a very, very good job of it. I always recommend using them. So that's uh, that's really what happened. Um, and you know, it really is seamless now. Back in the old days, we had to use the IRS letter writing campaign, like I said, we can't know the IRS letter writing thing, letter forwarding program's over. You can't do 100% withholding to the government anymore. And like I said, you have these safe, effective tools to push these people out. You know, I've seen, situations where ghosts keep coming back up. You have plans terminate 8 years later. DOL, IRS, you know, they're penalties. But it's an issue, and that's a problem. And the DFVCP is not really an option once you get that notice from the government that you owe money for these missing 5500s. The DOL doesn't really care if the business owner is, now retired in Florida or the TPA firm merged 3 times. Someone, usually the last listed plan administrator, remains on the hook. I have a situation now where I represented a TPA that went belly up, and they were the plan administrator for a plan sponsor that owes 3 or 4 missing 5500s and audits. That's a problem. Lessons from the Caribbean. Uh, in Pirates of the Caribbean, I'm told, the cursed crew of the Black Pearl couldn't die until they returned every piece of stolen good to its chest. For plan sponsors, that same logic is going to apply. You can't rest until every participant account is distributed and every Form 5500 is filed. You fail to do that, and you'll find yourself like Captain Barbosa, alive but haunted. Again, the Department of Labor doesn't care, we don't know is not a really valid excuse by them. They expect sponsors to work with competent TPAs, risk attorneys, and record keepers who understand termination timelines. And just like pirates dividing treasure, communication is vital. So, best ways to avoid a haunting is to prevent one. And how do you do that? You keep your crew in check. Make sure the TPA, record keeper, and payroll provider communicate about final payroll dates, deferral cutoffs, and distribution processing. Ghost plans don't really happen without poor coordination. If everything's coordinated, chances are the plan providers are not going to screw up, and the plan sponsor's not going to screw up. It's important to document everything. Keep board resolutions, notices to participants, and final 5500 filings handy. If the DOL comes calling, paperwork is your life raft. It's important to understand the true deadline. Like I said, 7 months after the plan closes, not 7 months after the end of the plan year. You need to mark the date clearly and set reminders. I've seen so many plans recently where this has become a bigger and bigger issue. Somebody's dropping the ball and not realizing when the 5500s do. That's really something important. And it's important not to rely on oral promises where the TPA says, you know what, I'm going to take care of it, blah, blah, blah. You need proof. Confirm that final 5500 was accepted by EFAST and it's marked as final. Otherwise, your plan may still be sailing without you. Dead bodies, I think it's important to bury the plan properly. You don't have to bury it. You could give it an old, good Viking funeral, as seen at the end of History of the World Part 1. As a kid, I didn't understand the joke. I thought there was going to be a History of the World Part 2, so I thought I was going to see a Viking funeral and Jews in space and all that stuff. And instead, I had to wait 30 some odd years for Hulu to come out with the History of the World Part 2 and just find it terribly unfunny. there's nothing worse to think that your plan, that you terminated is dead and buried, and it isn't. It's like something like the horror movies that kill off Jason or Mike Myers, and all of a sudden they're clawing their way out of the grave. You know, the Department of Labor doesn't need a compass to find noncompliance. They've got databases, cross references, and a long memory. So when you terminate a 401k plan, you have to do it right. Do it right or don't do it at all. Because at the end of the day, not doing it right means you didn't do it at all anyway. You got to follow the map. You collect the treasure, distribute all the assets. You file the 5500 as final when due and file it on time. And only then can your plan finally rest in peace. As soon as I said rest in peace, I thought of the rest of The Undertaker. Because in the world of ERISA, dead plans tell plenty of tales, and none of them really have any happy endings. And that's life. And that's really the nature of, terminated plans. It's one of those things I always said when I went to BU for my LLM, and I learned ERISA. And, the textbook says one thing, but, the textbook is not life. The textbook presumes everything is going to be done correctly. And I assure you, after 27 years in this business, that's not really the case. Screw-ups happen. Textbooks state the law clearly. TPA firms and plan sponsors, they got their own things to deal with. And a lot of times they just don't deal things correctly. And that's why you'll have a situation where you'll have a terminated plan, and 5 or 6 years later, you realize nobody did their work, and nobody did their job, and that's a problem. So it's incumbent on the plan sponsor to do everything correctly and have plan providers to help them, guide them to do everything correctly. So that's it for this week's episode. And go to that 401ksite.com. Like I said, we're 4 months away from a great event in Wrigley Fields, 5 months away from a great event in Denver. Go to that 401ksite.com, sign up for our free national virtual conference. I'll have to reach out to people and try to get them to speak. We got to fill out that dance card. We have a couple dozen people already signed up for it. Free events are interesting concept. If you have a sign up, 50% of the people aren't going to show up. That's just the nature of things. And go to Amazon.com. Full Circle, available still on Amazon. The fourth book, that 401k Plan Provider Handbook, is available for pre-order on Kindle. And the paperback will be available on January 6th. That's the day you'll get your Kindle edition if you pre-order. I think it's a great book. Not a lot of personal stuff in there. I think that my audience has told me now they don't want to buy a book where I tell them my famous bullshit stories. So we got other stories about the retirement plan business, my experience in marketing and the do's and don'ts, treating employees, all that kind of stuff. It's just my ideas. I, just had a call with somebody for a half hour this week, somebody new in this neck of the woods in this business, and, advising them on what maybe to do and what not to do, and how people out in this business, there are certain people in this industry that just want to have you spend needlessly on conferences and other sponsorships and whatnot, and that your assets are not limitless in marketing and all that kind of stuff. So it's kind of the gist of my experiences and, writing and all that kind of stuff. So 260 something pages, I think, of it. $9.99 on Amazon, $11.99 for paperback. So $9.99 is a Kindle version. So I hope you enjoyed this episode of that 401k podcast. Tune in next week for another fun-filled episode of that 4K podcast. Take care.